Welcome to the Consummate Athlete podcast, where we explore what it means to be a well-rounded, happy, goal-crushing athlete. Every week, myself, sports journalist Molly Herford, and cycling coach and kinesiologist Peter Glassford interview experts and chat through all of your training questions. We're excited to have you along for the ride. Hello. Welcome back to the Consummate Athlete podcast. Another day, another great episode. This is one that we've been teasing for a couple weeks now. We have Stevie Lynn Smith, registered dietitian, specialty in sports dietetics, back in the house.
That's right. It's very exciting. A lot of questions always around, body composition. Fueling is very popular this year with the increased carbs per hour. Specifics around women's fueling. Hydration has been really popular. So I think we were overdue to have an RD back, and certainly overdue to have Stevie back.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think what I really love about this episode is we talk through a lot of different frameworks for different things, whether we talk about how to really think about how much fuel you need on the bike. So it's not just, oh yes, we know now that 120 grams of carbohydrates is great for elite performers. We're talking about okay, how do you figure out what actually makes sense for you? How would you go about doing that kind of detective work and figuring out what makes sense for your body, for the work that you're doing in these specific situations? We talk about weight loss in the off season and, when is this appropriate? How is this appropriate? How do you even start thinking about how to approach weight loss?
And who, right? Yeah, the other piece. Yeah. And I'm always curious with these concepts: race weight, fueling, recovery. How much does it matter for, my clients who are 50 and 60 years old and are going to work, and maybe you're squeezing in, 30 to 60 minutes a day? How critical is this? And what does it, look like for someone like that versus, Matthew Vanderpool, who's riding 5 hours a day and is much younger than a lot of us, right? And genetics are different. How do we reconcile all this?
Exactly. Yeah. And then the third thing we talk about is really the filters we would think about thinking about supplements. And again, everyone is going to be different. Everyone is going to be coming at them from a different lens with different needs, different intentions for them. So we really talk through what makes sense for an athlete. And, we've been hearing a ton about, say, sodium bicarbonate, baking soda lately. And that's one of the ones we sort of talk through. What would make, what are the use cases? Who's using it right now? What do we know? But also, where does it make sense for you? And
how many people do you think have pooped their pants because of this latest surge?
We do talk about that. I'm not going to lie.
I was reading an article and they just sort of said, try it out.
You might poop your pants.
They noted that there was some side effects, but I just wonder how many, especially if you went right to the dosage, because it is a fair bit. Baking soda doesn't taste that great, and it is pretty, it makes you feel nauseous if you're just doing baking soda.
Well, and good Lord, if you're, it's one thing if you're a cyclist, but if you are a runner, good Lord, you, honestly, I would say the first time you try this as a runner, for the love of God, do it on a treadmill in your own home. Well,
and I usually have people start, it's 0.3 grams, I think. I usually start at 0.1 and just try the taste, because even that a lot of people will have. Now, this is the reason there's this Martin, these new versions that are trying to shuttle it into the stomach without issues. The downside being the cost for a lot of people. So we are in an evolving era for this, but you do wonder how much of this is hype and how many people are just going to poop their pants again. And I say again because this has happened, I think, 3 times over my lifespan in the sport. So these things do come in waves.
So you're due to
I should have thought of a better term. These do things, sort of poop analogy.
You know what? Let's just get into this episode with Stevie Smith. Definitely head over to the show notes to check out all of the links and to find all of her websites. She also has a fantastic new podcast. I was just on it a few weeks ago. So definitely head over and check that out. Without further ado, enjoy this episode with Stevie Smith. Stevie, welcome back to the Consummate Athlete podcast. I'm so excited. You're one of my favorite repeat guests.
Yeah. So honored to be back here again, joining you. It's been 3 years?
It's been a while. It's been a while. I mean, I forget because I talk to you so often for all articles for bicycling and Canadian running and Canadian cycling. So I feel like we're in kind of constant contact. Anyway, I was just on your new podcast. So before I just start peppering you with questions, why don't you give us the quick who you are, what you're up to, tell everyone about your podcast, all the fun stuff.
Yeah, let's see if I can make this quick. But hello, I'm Stevie Lynn Smith. I'm a registered dietitian. I'm board certified in sports nutrition. I've been practicing over 12 years now, which like sometimes I still think I'm 28, and I have to remind myself that I'm not.
I
That
know exactly what you mean. I was doing an interview yesterday and they're like, "How long have you been cycling?" And I'm like, "Oh, not very long." And then I'm like, "Oh no, like 20 years." Whoops.
yeah,
Yeah,
you're
not
like,
23 anymore.
oops, the math is mathing. Um, yeah, so I've been practicing for 12 years. I have my own private practice, all online, Stevie Lynn Nutrition. Could not come up with a fun name. So I'm like, you know what? We're just gonna use my names. Great, it works.
I like it. I like it. Uh,
Yeah, and I help and work mostly with endurance athletes, runners, triathletes, cyclists, swimmers. But I also love to work with active individuals because I find those active individuals probably do just as much as some of my endurance athletes. They just don't have a race or finish line in sight. But nutrition is still just as important. So I have a lot of different ways that I work with people, but I also have a new podcast, Real Fuel with SLS, where I just have really great conversations with people involved in endurance sports and sports nutrition. So I have PTs, of course, I had Molly on there, other sports RDs, some athletes. So it's fun to chat with people in that format and have them share their stories. And I feel like we can all relate in some way. And make them feel less alone, you know?
Yeah. No, I love that. And I think it's so important to keep having those conversations. I consider doing this podcast, honestly, like continuing education in a lot of ways, because you get all of these different, concepts and ideas and even just like life experiences that you don't have. And yeah, I think it's so important, especially for people in our field, to kind of keep having these chats. And I
Yeah.
did want to kind of hone in on the registered dietitian because again, it's been a while since we've had you on. So I do
hmm
want to just like give us the quick, like, what is the difference between a registered dietitian and a nutritionist? And like when someone is thinking about because we are getting into fall, we're getting into the off season, I'm gonna obviously have to ask the like losing weight in the off season question here,
Oh yeah.
because everyone has asked it. So, a lot of people are starting to look towards like getting some extra expert help. So talk to me about the importance of registered dietitian.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like all of us dietitians tend to do the Lord's work with this question, but basically all registered dietitians are nutritionists, but not all nutritionists are registered dietitians. So that's an in first point to help people kind of be like, oh, okay, like a nutritionist doesn't necessarily mean that like this is the right person for me to work with. Um, the requirements to be a nutritionist, basically, this is a self-proclaimed title. Anyone can call themselves a nutritionist. They may or may not have nutrition education or training. So there's a lot of nutritionists and even nutrition coaches that are out there on the internet. And I want to say that not all nutrition coaches are bad, especially if they are very good about being firm as this is how I can help you, and I'm not going to step out of my scope of practice. Their scope of practice is very small. But basically a lot of these nutrition coaches or nutritionists may only have like a weekend textbook certification, which again is not like it's something, but it's not really in-depth training. And they're basically the big fine line is they're not recognized as medical professionals.
Hmm.
They don't have board exams. They don't have the biggest thing that I see is that they don't have a code of ethics to practice. This does not mean that every dietitian follows ethics, right? There's bad eggs in every bunch, which is where you have to do a little research, a little Googling, dive in, kind of look for green flags and red flags. But as registered dietitians, I have to sit for a board exam. I have to do continuing education on a 5-year cycle to maintain that board examination, like the credentialing that I have to be an RD. And then for the specialty certification, I'll see people calling themselves a sports dietitian, but they don't have the CSSD credentials. I love that because getting that credential is not easy. I'll talk a little bit more now about what it takes to be a dietitian. Several years of rigorous coursework in food and nutrition sciences, physiology, anatomy, other subjects as well. Like I was a chemistry minor by the end of it, basically.
Yep. Yep.
Now it's required to earn a master's degree. I was in the previous bunch of RDs where it wasn't required. I do have a master's degree in applied nutrition because I wanted that higher level of education for myself. Then you have to complete at least 1,000 hours of supervised practice to gain real world experience. I just basically call this like baby residency, except we don't get paid. We pay to do it to become a dietitian. But like you're in the hospitals, you're in the community, you're learning how to apply all of that coursework into skill. You got to pass that credentialing exam and then meet state requirements to practice as an RDN. That'll vary from state to state. The continuing education, and then the advanced certification, like mine is CSSD, Certified Specialist in Sports Dietetics. To sit for that exam, I had to practice for at least be in practice, be an RD at least for 2 years, have 2,000 hours of practice and work time with athletes before I could even sit for the board exam. Then I had to sit for the board exam and pass it. And I have to recert that every 5 years. So there's other specialties like people can be certified specialists in oncology or diabetes or gerontology or pediatrics. And then there's one for sports nutrition. So yeah.
Yeah.
I can never make that short.
No, I think that's just such good context for everyone. And I mean, like Peter and I have both done the precision nutrition course, which I mean, like the sad thing is like that's what I think a lot of like internet nutritionists have done. And we would never call ourselves nutrition experts. Like we have that as we can speak about very basic nutrition.
Yeah.
But we would never be like, yes, hire us for like nutrition consults. And that would be
that's where I really struggle. It's like you can learn a lot, but like the fact that they created this course to be like, oh, don't go to school all of this time. Like, what? Is that what we want? And and I feel like I've said this a lot, but a good majority of my clients come to me after working with nutrition coaches. Because things go great and they lose all this weight and all of that until things hit the rail.
Yeah.
It's usually under eating for the very active individual.
Okay, that's perfect. That's actually one of the big questions I wanted to actually start with was sort of the actual early warning signs that someone isn't fueling enough, and specifically asking about this not just for the super lean pro athlete types, because I think this is a problem that also applies to the 200 plus pound guys that are out there training, 10 plus hours a week.
Yeah. So it's really, really important to know that any body size shape can be in low energy availability. Like just like eating disorders and disordered eating can happen in any body. You don't need to be thin or look thin or look lean to be in low energy availability. Or again, struggle with disordered eating or eating disorders. There's no look to it. And I actually have a post coming about a new study that just came out that looked in low energy availability in recreational female endurance athletes and how prevalent it is. Because
oh my God, let me guess, it's somehow higher than in the pro field. Or at least
I don't remember off the top of my head if it's higher than the pro field, but it is higher than most people actually realize, because I see so many individuals say like, well, I'm a 5-hour marathoner. Like I could never. Like you don't have to be a certain speed or size or shape to struggle with this or be in that state of low energy availability. So
yeah,
yes,
absolutely.
very important.
Yes. And there's our PSA. So how do we know? How do we know?
Yes, signs that you might be in low energy availability. This shows up differently for a lot of people, of course. And a lot of the early signs, I feel like endurance athletes are either they don't know, like it's a knowledge deficit, or we just kind of think we got to push through those things. There's a lot of things glamorized in endurance sports and regular exercisers that I'm like, this is a red flag or an orange flag. But one of the thing, constantly thinking about food and obsessing about food. That's a super common one that people miss. Like, yeah, you can have cravings, but like if you are like spend most of your day thinking about food or obsessed about or worrying about it or anxious about it, obviously that can be a sign of disordered eating, but it also could mean like, yo, your body is underfueled and just like hungry. Like, please feed it. Um, that's a big one. Even changes in mood, which I know this one can get gray because there's lots of other factors that are going to impact that, but like becoming more irritable, anxious, flat mood, depressed feelings, especially if it's tied to your performance. That's a big red flag. Like, or if you're going to miss a run, and you're really anxious about it, or you're really sad because, oh, maybe your calf hurts and you have to take a few days off of running. If that completely tanks your mood, that's a big old red flag. Um, we're also looking at poor recovery after workouts. Like if you're super sore all the time, inability to hit key workouts. Like if you're in a bike workout and you're like, you gotta bail or you can't do your intervals in the session, yeah, occasionally that's going to happen. But if it's popping up pretty consistently that you're not able to hit or hold those like key powers or like I said, intervals, that's a big one. Sleep disturbances, another one as well. Those are probably the biggest one. I feel like there's just like so many, but when we're thinking about like how we can look at it in our performance, needing to nap after all of your long
Ooh.
workouts. Yes. Or
Ooh.
needing to nap pretty regularly. Of course, there's nuance to this. Like if you're like my shift worker and
Yeah.
you're a nurse working 412s and then you're training too. Like there's some nuance to that. And, it's not necessarily that all naps are bad. There are some studies, especially in student athletes, about sleep banking and naps it can be beneficial. But like if you can't go out and do your long workout on a Saturday and then go do all the things like with your family or your friends or other responsibilities, that's a big old red flag right there.
Ooh, yeah, yeah. And I mean, I think there's a ton of people that would fall into that one very handily. I mean, geez, I know for myself. I'm like, oh yeah, like that is 100% me on like long run weekends for
Yep.
don't
Yep. No, of course, nuance. Like maybe it was a really stressful week.
Oh no,
And
no, I need to eat more. Like that's
but I don't want people to like if you're occasionally kind of like crashing and you're like, oh man, or if it's like one of those times where like I gotta get up at 5, like I gotta get this done and it cuts in. So it's not hard and fast every time, but like if you're like one of those people, a long run to a long nap, like
hmm.
maybe time to check in on what you're doing.
Yeah, yeah. I think one of the really interesting things that I've seen play out for myself and I think for Peter as well recently is when I first started, and we talked about this in your podcast, like I was definitely underfueled when I first started in Ironman.
Mhm.
This is 15 years ago. This is when coaches were like, 1,500 calories a day are great for women, even when they're training 40 hours a week. No problems there. Um, I think my problem is it's always easy to say like the marker of low energy availability is performance decline. But what
Mhm.
if your performance was never where it could have been if you were fueling? And Peter actually had 10 years of, we've talked about this like on the podcast, going way lower carb than he probably should have been. And then recently he started upping his carbs just kind of because, and suddenly he's like, oh, I'm a lot faster now. Weird.
Yeah.
But it
Yeah.
was so chronic, and there was never a point where he's like either of us like started at the like, I'm perfectly fueled. This is what my like good performance is. So I think
Mhm.
there are a lot of people that have always been at this like kind of depressed performance.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, for sure. And yeah, and it's some people get really frustrated, like clients, and I can understand their frustration. And they're like, well, this person I run with only takes one gel on their 3-hour run and they're not hurt or they're not like their body isn't in chaos. And like it's the unfortunate truth that some of this is genetic. Some people are more resilient, or it just takes longer for them to get into, I'll just say chaos. Or their chaos isn't as drastic as the next person. But just like you said with Peter, it's like, okay, but maybe you're getting by and doing okay. But like, what can you gain from increasing?
So exactly, yeah, like yeah, that person that's doing fine on the one gel, maybe they're doing fine compared to yeah, like compared to the people they're running with. But how much faster could they be? How much stronger could they be if they were actually fueling well? So I think this is like where the experiment becomes really fun.
Yes, and I'm thinking about my friend Chaz. I know he has my grace to say this because I'm going to call him out. So when I've known him since high school, and he got into endurance sports, and we've worked together. He's in my membership still, and he was like going on 15-mile runs and not fueling. He's like, yeah, but like I can do it, and I was like, yeah, just because you can doesn't mean you should.
100%. Yep.
It's always the guys who I have to tell that. I was like, yeah, like that's great, but like just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I think really like what we're kind of getting at here is like there's really no downside to trying to fuel more and see how that feels. Like other
Yeah,
than maybe like a porta potty stop. We'll
right.
caveat that.
And there, like when you're trying, like say you're a one gel person on a 2-hour run, if you start to increase or you're not used to eating before your workouts, start small. Like don't try to get to the end goal on the first try because it's probably going to upset your tummy. I have a delicate stomach. And
Same.
I can tolerate up to 80 grams of carbohydrate per hour during exercise, but like it took me time to get there. You have to train your gut. Just start small, try different fuel sources, figure out like I always tell people like flavor, textures, do a couple different things so you don't get flavor fatigue. Just play around with it. There's I feel like we've talked about this before. We probably talked about it on my podcast. There's so many options in sports nutrition now that like I promise you there's something out there that's going to work for you.
100%. Yeah. Yeah. Now, you mentioned the 80 grams, and we know what we've been seeing from all the pros lately is like the like up to like 120 and even beyond grams
Yeah.
of carbs, which is a
lot
lot of carbs per hour. I would love to, hear your thoughts about, does that make sense for everyone? Because I mean, the flip side of like underfueling is like there are like we always say there's always the two extremes. There's the people
Yeah.
and like the person who needs to hear it probably is going to hear the wrong side of what we're talking about. But like there's the people that need to fuel more that are
Mhm.
probably listening and being like, that's not me. I can totally do the 15-mile run with one gel or no gel. It's fine. I've
Mhm.
got this. And then there's the person who's heading out for the 15-mile run with like a like backpack worth of snacks.
Mhm.
And they're going to try to slam, well, if 120 is good, like 140 is even better.
Yeah.
Um, so talk to me about like how we think through like how many we need and how we should be thinking about this, a whole experiment.
Yeah, absolutely. So I can tell you in my experience working, I've worked with some professional and elite athletes, but the majority of my clientele are, your everyday athlete. They have a lot of other things going on. They're just trying to go out and do their best. We're not focused on winning races. Um, so when it comes to grams of carb per hour, yes, we can go over 100 up to 120, some people even more. Does the average person need to do it? No, I would say no, probably not. I think my everyday athlete client that's gotten the highest was 100 grams of carb per hour. He was a bigger guy. It worked well for him. He felt great. He recovered well after his efforts, and it felt manageable to him. So great, grand. We love to see it. As for everybody else, that 60 to 90 grams per hour is typically the sweet spot I tell people to try and fall between. This you'll see for exercise over 2 hours. I be a little bit more generous. If we're going to be out for an hour and a half, if we can get, 60, 70 grams of carb per hour, I feel like there's only things to be gained. Um, so what I encourage people to do is, okay, what are you doing now? Where are you at? Okay, will it take, say over a 2 hour run, for you to get to that 60 gram per hour? It's usually not adding too much more if you're already fueling. So play around with it, see how that feels, and then keep adding on from there. Like for me, that 80 gram per hour, that to me, I was like, I'm done. Like
Yep.
over that feels like too much. I don't feel well. I feel a little sick to my stomach. So like 70 to 80 is about my sweet spot.
Mm-hmm.
And I know like my body feels good. I can take all of my fuel. I know what works. And another thing, I know I said this already, but that in-workout fuel is going to help you recover faster from your efforts. So that's something I have people to pay attention to. Like, don't just go for the bare minimum of 60. Like, if you hit 60 and you're feeling good, maybe try 65 or 70 and pay attention to how your energy is after those hard efforts and how well you recover after those hard efforts, too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think for me, the biggest learning was like the last hour of my run or ride needs to still be fueled because
Yes.
I'm definitely of the like, or I was of the, ooh, like I can't wait to get home to XYZ snack. And now I'm like, no, you can still go home to XYZ snack. You just need to keep fueling.
Yes. It's always about that gel in like the last 2 miles, right? It's
100%.
like
Yep.
you're like, oh, like yeah, I could get home, like I'm gonna be fine. But taking that last gel, because there's nothing worse than those last 2 miles, like you just start to crash, right?
Yep. Yep. Yeah. Nothing like, yeah, nothing makes a good run go from like, this is a great run. I feel good to, yeah, like bonking in your last 2 miles and now you come in the whole run sucked.
And
Terrible.
I,
The
I, I,
worst.
I remember like the first few like bricks of the like season, like getting back into it. It would be like a 2 hour ride and like a 20-minute recovery run. All it took was like bonking once on that recovery run, and then I started bringing a gel every time.
100%. Yeah. And it's funny, not a lot of our listeners are triathletes, but the one thing we always talk about is the like doing these like kind of double workouts where you are getting off the indoor trainer and maybe going for a little run or like indoor trainer to like outdoor bike as like the weather gets crappier. It's a good way to mix up and not be outside in miserable weather the entire ride. Um,
Yep.
and I think that's actually a really good point is like when we are doing these workout bricks, like fueling the shorter part as well as the main part or the longer part.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I all it
love
took
that.
was one time, and I was like, "Ooh, mistake was made."
Yep, yep, yep. And I mean, this does give rise to the question of the like weight loss and training. We're hitting fall, we're hitting like base phase, off season, whatever you want to call it. New Year's is coming, holidays are coming. This is just when, as athletes, so many of us cannot avoid the topic of weight loss. So, what are things we're thinking about heading into this
It's
time?
my favorite season. Being sarcastic. When it comes to weight loss, body composition change, this is something that I will approach very calculated. Um, Typically this should be done again in base phase off season when we're not really trying to put in big volume, hit key workouts, all of the above. Um, we want to make it in a way that's not depleting. We need to be in a little bit of a deficit to see those those weight loss body composition changes that we want to see. Typically that should just be like a small shift in how we're approaching our nutrition. Typically going more, if we're familiar with athletes plates, more towards the easy to moderate day plates, basically just a very tiny shift down in carbs on the plate. We're still eating carbs. We're getting, more of that color, fruits and vegetables. We're focusing on protein. Sometimes too, it depends on the person. Like, do you
Hmm.
do a really poor job of getting protein? That might be where we start with our focus. It doesn't mean we're not fueling what workouts we have. We still follow those same fueling guidelines. I know
Yes,
a
we
lot
are
of
not dropping the carbs during the workout.
Yes, because what I see is in practice, a lot of people come to me with a lot of weight gain from underfueling. And
Oh,
a lot of people, what happens is that we have to basically do like a refeed. We have to get them from like, we'll just say they were eating 1,600 calories a day and training 10 hours a week, 10, 12, 15 hours a week. And then, like, yeah, things were going fine, but then they started to gain weight. So what we have to work to do is actually get them up to maybe like we'll say 2,000, 2,200, depends on the person. And in that process, they tend to gain a little bit more weight and then they freak out. But I'm like, you cannot be underfed. Underfueling is a form of stress. And how some people are going to respond to that is weight gain, body composition changes. We're seeing, especially as we get older, when there's loss in muscle mass. And then you add in all the other life stressors on top of it. Like under eating is not going to help you get to where you want to be. Um, so it's usually a process of increasing caloric intake. A lot of the people who want to have weight loss, I'm like, if you're training for 70.3, you're training for a big race. No, like this is
no, not
you
the
have to
time.
focus on performance first. And a number of people, we've really taken a step back on their exercise. I'm thinking of one client in particular. I was like, listen, we got to just take a lot of rest and like do walking and very light movement, get your body back in order, then start with the strength training again, like hit up your strength coach. So also, basically the point of it too is that in addition to the nutrition changes, depending on the person, there usually is also a big cutback in training. And well, I'm thinking of my example client. She had a hard time, but she stayed the course. But after about 3-ish months of a big drop back, and then transitioning into balancing her plates, strength training, light run walks, she started to lose the weight.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So good. And this is where, if you want to maintain athletic performance and hit a certain body comp goal, I think you do need to have that like team around you. This is where the like registered dietitian,
Yep.
this is where, a strength coach who can at least like give you a program,
Yeah.
like a coach who can like help you, like what's kind of the minimum viable to like keep going with my
Yep.
training so that I'm ready for next season, but I'm not overdoing it. Yeah.
Yeah. And, unfortunately, like I always tell people, I'm not anti weight loss, but like it's the long game.
Yep.
It's typically people have been doing like weird shit with their nutrition or like
For sure.
under fueling for so long that I'm like, okay, it's going to take time that if we're going to do this in not a crazy way, that it's going to take some time to get you to where you want to be. You have to stay the course. You have to be consistent with these good habits to kind of get your body to where it should be and where it wants to be. It can't be in this crazy stressed out state forever. So we're going to take, we can't get rid of work stress or financial stress or life stress. So we need to build those solid, really boring, non-glamorous things to create a better resiliency to stress. And oftentimes like cutting back training is a really good way to kind of rebalance that as well.
Yep, yep. And actually, I do want to talk about the where you want to go because I think, we know, I'd say we have a lot of masters men who going under 200 pounds is their goal.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter how tall they are, how big they are, under 200 pounds on the scale. And I would say most of the women I know
Mhm.
have like that damn thing that we heard when we were teenagers of the 5 feet, 100 pounds, every inch after that, you add 5 pounds, and that's the ideal body weight for women. I
Mhm.
could not stress how sarcastic I was being when I said that enough. But if you were listening and you thought I was serious, I was not. Um, so also maybe talk to me about how do you talk to clients about their expectations and like what actually like makes sense for
Yeah.
them, perhaps.
This is where a lot of people might not like me and might not want to work with me, and that's fine. I'm not for you. It's okay. I don't like weight goals. Like,
Thank you.
throw the scale into the trash. Now, that being said, again, I'm not against weight loss if we're doing it right. and we're not sacrificing your health. But when we get hyper fixated on X, Y, or Z number, then we tend to do whatever it takes to get there and then feel like shit or get injured, or we're doing things that are going to impact our long-term health negatively. So I typically prefer people that if we are weighing, we're not doing it obsessively. Please.
Yep.
But we're not letting a certain number drive our progress, say like, okay, we're making progress because I hit this number, or I'm at my end goal because I hit this number. I want them to pay attention to how are you feeling? How are you sleeping? How are you performing? How are your clothes fitting? What's your mood? Do you notice those changes? So kind of also too, more from the performance side of things. Like for example, I know when I hit a certain weight, my performance starts to suck. Like,
Yep.
cool, maybe I'm thinner, but like I don't perform well and I can just kind of get by that. Like, okay, maybe that number is too low. So it's about kind of being able to recognize these other factors and see, okay, this is where my body feels good and I feel strong in my workouts. And that's, something we can kind of figure out together, that we're finding that sweet spot where we're not underfueled and kind of feeling meh all of the time, but still in a place where we feel comfortable in our bodies and we're able to perform like we want to.
Mm-hmm. I love it. I love it. Yeah, I was like, I mean, if I really want to see a certain number on the scale, I'll just go to hot yoga a couple times and then hop on right after.
Right? It's just like, it's like, I don't understand. And I always think about it because, like, when I first started endurance sports, I was like, oh, I have to be like 120 pounds.
Yeah, exactly.
And I was like, I have to do it. And then I was like, oh, I kind of don't feel good there. I'm
Yeah,
like, I'm
turns out.
performing better about 5 pounds, 6 pounds heavier. Great. You know?
Yep.
It's
Yep. There we go.
it's always with the weight thing too. It's like people are like, but what if I gain weight? But like, what else are you going to gain with it? What positives? You
Mm-hmm.
know? Throw
100%.
the
Yeah.
scale in the trash. That's my opinion.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, really, like the older I get, the more I realize just how hard it is to put on muscle as well. And one of the unfortunate side effects of weight loss, especially rapid weight loss, is that we drop muscle. And guess what? That might have been okay when we were 25 and like
Yeah.
could put it back on pretty quickly, but like I feel like I'm now at the age where, I lost a bit of muscle in my right calf with this sprained ankle.
Yeah.
And it's still not like it's been like 3 weeks and it's not back. Come on. But honestly, 10 years ago, it would have been back.
Yeah.
Like that would have like bounced right back. And now I'm gonna have to do a lot of work to bring
Yeah.
that back. And that was 2 weeks of doing a little less on that leg.
Yeah. It is so much harder. And that muscle mass, again, everybody gets so performance focused. And it's also like, wait a minute, let's think about like when we're old. And we want to still, like, I'm sure a lot of your listeners want to keep cycling forever. Like, we need to maintain that muscle mass, to keep doing what we love forever, but also to be able to do all of the things in our daily life, because we're gonna lose that muscle mass, we're gonna lose bone density. And we know that, like you said, it's harder to put on. It's harder to maintain those levels. So it's also, again, I always look at it from a health perspective. I was like, I don't want to break a hip. You know the
Exactly.
mortality rate of a broken hip?
Well, and beyond that, I mean, like if you, if you want to keep the weight off, what makes it really hard to do that? Being stuck in a wheelchair because you broke your hip.
Exactly.
So really you're shooting yourself in the foot for like the short term gain of a few pounds coming off like on the scale. But yeah,
Exactly.
so yay muscle is really where we're at here. Um and okay, we've kind of talked about like all of this, day in the life food and protein and like calories and stuff. What is your take on the like where are you counting, recording, auditing all of this data, and then even like with the wearables now, like where do you fall on the Aura, the Whoop, the CGM, all of the things?
Where do I even start? I don't love if people obsessively track their macros and food.
Amen.
Not not my favorite. Most people have a poor relationship with food and exercise, and they don't realize that they do because it's so glamorized to do this kind of obsessive tracking that they don't even think it's a negative relationship. So I don't encourage it. That being said, if you are comfortable with it and you're not going to be like, oh, well, I'm hungry, but I can't eat any more calories today, so I'm done eating today. Um,
That is the thing that I have had every time I've ever tried to use a food tracker. It almost turns into a weird like competitive game with myself of like how low can you keep it? It's yeah, I've learned
yeah.
I'm not a scale person, I'm not an app person, I am a nothing person.
Yes, exactly. So, there are like typically, some people have a fine enough relationship with food and exercise and tracking that they can track for a couple days, maybe in like their big training cycle, and kind of be like, okay, where am I falling? Like, where
Mhm.
am I at? And most people find out they're falling short. Um, that's something where, like, again, if the relationship is good, we can use that as a tool and be like, all right, like, I need to focus on protein more, or my carbs are way too low. Let's do this. That's one way I encourage people to use it. It should not be like a consistent thing. When I work with my clients one on one, we have a food and mood journal, which is not number focused, but basically recording what they're eating and then, how they feel before, during, and after. I tell them it doesn't need to be a diary entry every time you eat, but if they're things like, wow, I was really hungry, I was feeling weak and starving, or my energy is crashing at 3 o'clock every day, we can take that information and be like, here's some adjustments to make. Or I'm like, okay, we got to adjust your timing of pre-workout, post-workout. Maybe people are waking up really hungry in the night. That's another sign of low energy availability if you're waking up really hungry. So we're
Mm.
adding in a bedtime snack. So I use that with my clients just to make shifts and adjustments, see how we're doing. But that's short term, only while we're working together. Um, as for like Whoop, Oura rings, etc., you can learn some interesting things. I wore Whoop for a while, but then I was like, this is not telling me anything new that I didn't already know. Maybe it
Mhm.
was only helpful to me when I was like, oh, I have a 1% recovery. I probably have COVID.
I will, yeah, I wore an Aura ring for a while and that was it actually like, yeah, caught a fever and like
Yeah.
that, later that day I was like, oh yes, I do feel sick. So
Yeah. I mean, it can, like I said, it can give you interesting insights. I don't think it's anything earth shattering. Like, wow, when I work out before bed, I don't sleep great. Or I had a glass of wine. My recovery was crap. So like I think for short term, if you want to gain some insights as to like what's impacting you, what's not impacting you, that can be a good tool. CGMs. I don't recommend these.
it's so funny. I thought they were sort of over, but now I feel like suddenly I'm like hearing about them more and I guess like they're or are about to become more readily available over the counter in the
Yep.
US.
Yep.
So
Um,
I think we're going to see more and more about them now that the price has come down in the next year, say.
yeah. I mean, what kills me, first of all, is that so many people actually with diabetes have so many issues getting CGMs.
Right?
And then most of these athletes using these have perfectly functioning pancreas and they don't really need a CGM. Um, and then my big issue is that people see a spike, and then all these apps have it in like red, and they're like, "Oh, I can't eat these foods." Well, like, okay, like postprandially, we want to see your blood glucose go up. Like when you're exercising, we want to keep our blood sugars higher and like pretty consistent. Like these are not necessarily bad things, but the
Hmm.
apps make it look bad because it's like, and like this spikes you, and it could dissuade people from eating very nutrient dense foods. Um, we want to see a spike, like I said. That's your body doing what it should. It means it's responding, which is great. Um, there's a case by case basis with clients where maybe we're using this for a month because
Sure.
we're having some signs and symptoms that we might have some blood sugar dysregulation, and also maybe some of our labs had a big jump, and we want to see what's going on and see where we can make adjustments in the daily routine to help them feel better. Um, that's usually something only like kind of combined with an elevated A1C that we want to see. But it's also important to know that when we are under fueling, we are also going to see some blood sugar dysregulation.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to happen with athletes. It's very, very, very common. Um, again, in that under fueling
That was actually
scenario.
something I was going to ask is I have heard that like there are plenty of athletes that end up with that like not like elevated into like red zone, but elevated A1C.
Yep. So basically, this is going to happen. We see an elevated A1C. This person is not eating enough or not enough macronutrients based on their energy levels. So then the body is going to suppress production of several different hormones, including insulin. Less glucose is then moved from your bloodstream to your cells, right? To make energy because insulin is like the key, right? It's going to unlock the cell for glucose to go in. We're under fueling. We don't have enough of that. Then more of that glucose is going to stay in your bloodstream. Therefore, you're going to have elevated A1C, the red blood cell turnover, with more glycation of hemoglobin. So then we get that level. And this kind of is cyclical, stemming from that low energy availability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely something to kind of keep in mind, especially if you are, getting any of these like blood work things done or your doctor's doing them and like instantly like, oh, you're in like pre-diabetic mode. You should actually cut down on the
Exactly.
carbohydrates and the processed food.
And this is where medical, like general physicians, medical doctors, they're just not trained to pick up on these signs. They also don't get to spend a lot of time with us as
Mm-hmm.
patients. So it's not that doctors are necessarily bad. This goes into a whole rant on the system sucks and it
Yeah.
doesn't service. And like, they're not sports medicine doctors. They're not trained to be like, oh, but this person is training a lot. Like, I know that this is something that can happen. Insurance gives them like 7 minutes with you once a year. So that's where working with a sports dietitian, or sports medicine doctor, if you have access to one, this would hopefully be a team that would recognize like, okay, wait a minute. We don't need to jump to the conventional average American recommendations because even if again you're not top in your age group or don't have a finish line, but you love to ride your bike a lot, like you are not the average American. So,
Yep, exactly. Yeah. Oh, so good.
mhm.
Okay. And the last, also totally, non-confrontational topic, definitely not up for debate, definitely not going to, throw up flags here. I'd love to talk about supplements because, again, I have like I want to specifically ask about sodium bicarb because baking soda, because that seems to be like the trendy one right now. But I wanted to start with like a more general, if someone is thinking about a supplement, I would love for you to just kind of talk through like, how does one sort of like filter, should I take XYZ supplement from like the actual like choice of the supplement itself, like say sodium bicarb, but also like which one to then pick as far as like, do I go on Amazon and just like, this one is the cheapest, so I'm buying it.
Right? Scamazon, as I like to say. Please don't buy your supplements on Amazon.
Wow.
Let's just start there. Any supplement, we want to look for third-party testing. Um, NSF, and informed choice for sport. You'll see those labels, just kind of Google it. You'll see it
And
on there.
not just for pro athletes. Like this has nothing to do with like being a top pro and passing like drug tests. It also just means that it's been tested for what's in it.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. So number one, I have like even my mom is pretty active, but like even people who aren't athletes, I'm having them use the supplements with those certifications. It's just like peace of mind. We all know, well, I feel maybe not everybody knows, I shouldn't assume, but supplements are not regulated by the FDA. So we want to make sure that we're getting a quality product because, I don't need to explain that. But also, you're spending a lot of money on them. You like want to make sure you're actually getting what's in the supplement. Second thing with supplements, I hate things that I hate. I strongly discourage taking things that have proprietary blends. Basically, the dose matters when we want to have an impact. Like, how much ashwagandha? Is it even enough to have an impact? That's the problem with proprietary blends. It actually is kind of like there's a concept called like crop dusting, which is like throwing a lot of things in there, but like we don't know if it's the amount that's going to be effective. Also, like probiotics too. Probiotics are not for everybody. I use probiotics very cautiously in my practice because also it can make people feel really bad.
Mm-hmm.
And there's different strains. And like, what strain is it? Is it enough to see a positive impact? Could we be getting this from food instead? So that's another thing. But honestly, like supplementation, I like to be very calculated. Like if you're not eating enough to begin with, no supplement is going to save you. The end. Like,
yes.
You know, of course, like if we get blood work done and we're vitamin D deficient, awesome. This is an easy fix. Let's find the right dose of vitamin D. Let's find that high quality product. Let's make sure we're taking it appropriately, like with food, because it's fat soluble. And then we're going to retest in 3 to 6 months, see where you're at, and then make adjustments. Like no supplement should be for a long term. There should be an end date. And this is where you see a difference between nutrition coaches and like people on the internet with their supplements. Like there should be an end date to your supplements. Like this should not be just like a band-aid we're slapping on forever. You know, we want to find out why is there this deficiency? Like what is the actual cause? I won't say root cause because I hate that because all the Huns on the internet say it. But like what is causing this? Is it poor absorption because you're underfueling and overtraining? Is it inadequate intake? You know, like what is happening here? So this is not just like a band-aid forever for you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think I'm very leery of any time a nutrition coach, naturopath, anyone, their first instinct is to say, here's the 5 supplements you need to take. That's sort of an immediate red flag for me on the note of, we started this conversation talking about like RDs versus nutritionists. And you said like, there's, red flags. Like to me, it's like when supplements are like kind of first order of business or like in the first discussion, I'm like, I'm out.
Yeah. And like, so I do GI map testing, which is stool testing in my practice. And like, that's something where a lot of resolving the issues is supplement forward. But I'm like, before anyone even buys the test, I'm like, listen, we're going to do a supplement protocol. It's going to kind of be a heavy hitter, but like, it's short term. Like we aren't doing this more than 90 days. And this is not something we're doing to maintain kind of like a good gut microbiome or environment. Like it's very calculated and it's definitely not forever.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think the other thing with supplements I always find like important to kind of shout out to athletes is like a lot of the stuff that we're using in sport, like there's a lot of gels now that have other crap in them. There's a lot of like recovery drinks and shakes and whatnot that have a lot of other crap in them. So you're probably already down the supplement road if you're doing kind of really most sports nutrition products at this point.
Yep. Here we are.
Here we are. Okay, so that does bring me to sodium bicarbonate. Everyone and their mother is talking about it. Actually, it's Road Worlds this past weekend. I don't know if you saw the video of like Mike Woods literally like eating it like with a spoon out of a bowl out of the back of one of the team cars, which like I'm just gonna put it out there. If you have to use a spoon in a bike race, it's too much. You're doing too much.
It's not I don't really recommend this. So sodium bicarbonate, aka baking soda.
Baking soda. Let's call it what it is here, people.
It's baking soda, people. It's been used in study for a while. It can improve performance, and it does this by delaying the onset of fatigue. And this is particularly in high intensity exercise lasting from 30 seconds up to 12 minutes. So basically, our kidneys are responsible for managing our pH levels. But when we're in that high intensity exercise, acid is more quickly produced and the kidneys can only manage buffering for so long. And that's where we see fatigue. So the concept of eating baking soda with a spoon is to buffer by increasing pH. But there are digestive risks that come with eating baking soda.
I was really hoping you were going to point that out. The disaster pants potential.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's pretty high. And I have not worked with an athlete and had them use this, but I know athletes like some rowers or whatever who have and just like have pooped their pants. Yeah. So you can poop your pants. There can also be cramping and bloating. Bloating is another common thing I hear. Nausea and vomiting. So it's like, again, what is there to be gained from this? Probably not a lot.
Certainly not for the recreational. We're not in contention for, like, we're not going to be sprinting into the finish for the win.
Yep. I mean, you can do smaller doses timed out to help manage some of that digestive distress. And I'm assuming that's probably what a lot of the professionals do, is that they're spreading it out, they're timing it out. We're doing a smaller dose of it to get some of those benefits. But for the average athlete, you probably need to work on day-to-day stuff and fueling. And basically, to me, the juice is not worth the squeeze, basically.
Love it. Love it. Yeah. Yep. And I mean, you know, this comes up to what we just said, like at the beginning of this conversation, where we're talking about like most athletes are not fueling enough, you know, in like hourly on the bike, on the run to begin with. So then you add in this thing that could potentially cause some gut distress, certainly isn't going to be like easy to get down kind of regardless.
Yep.
And you're going to do that almost like instead of getting all the calories. And let's maybe get you up to like the 60 to 90 grams carbs first, then maybe talk about some of this stuff.
Yeah. And if you wanted to try it, of course, work on the day-to-day stuff.
Know where the porta potties are.
Know where the bathroom is. Try it in your training. Like, I'm not saying like hard and fast, absolutely not. Work on the day-to-day, get the fueling up, get your recovery strategies down. And I don't mean just like chugging Chart cherry juice and wearing Normatec boots. Or did they rebrand? I don't remember. You know what I mean.
They're owned by Hyperice, but they're still Normatec. And like, okay. I'm not gonna lie, like, do I love mine? Absolutely. Like, did they help get the swelling down from my ankle? Absolutely. Do I think everyone needs them? Absolutely not.
No. You know, just work on that stuff. Try it out. If it works for you, love it for you. But it's definitely like weighed on the list of things that I will have to. I would rather do supplementation to focus on deficiencies, because like if you're vitamin D deficient, if you're B12 deficient, like you're gonna feel better if we get that corrected and figure out why that's happening, and then we're eating enough and we're fueling, and then we can get to like, that's what I consider more of the fun stuff, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Love it. Okay, before we wrap, remind everyone where they can find you, follow you, listen to the podcast, work with you, all the things.
So many things. You can find me on my corner of the internet at Stevie Linlin on Instagram, and that's STEVIELYN. My website and all the ways to work with me are linked there, but my website is stevielinrd.com, and you can always tune in to the Real Fuel with SLS podcast, wherever you listen to your podcast.
Love it. We'll include links to all of that in the show notes. Stevie, thank you so much. As always, so much fun chatting with you.
Always the best. Thank you.
Thanks so much for tuning in to the Consummate Athlete podcast. If you want to hear more training, racing, and endurance sport advice, make sure you subscribe to the podcast and leave us a rating and review. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at consummateathlete.com for a weekly dose of inspiration and advice straight to your inbox.